let's begin with the first reading. It's the book of Exodus, and it's the second book of the Torah. It's followed by Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And as a matter of fact, in those last two books, we have the same words that Jesus spoke in the gospel. In Deuteronomy 6:5, we have that second commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, almost the exact words. And in the book of Leviticus 19:18, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. The exact same words that Jesus uses in his quote to the young man who asked the question. And that's a good point there. When the Pharisees, these are the two groups that are involved right from the beginning of these past 3 Sundays. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, so here it's the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Last week it was the coin with the image of Caesar on it, and this same kind of group, that was at that time it was the temple priests and the leaders of the people who were challenging it. It's in the temple, and these church or these synagogue or these Jewish leaders are challenging Jesus on why he cleansed the temple. How could he do such a thing as cleansing the temple? And they asked him the point-blank question, by what authority do you do this? And Jesus goes on with a number of parables and statements kind of saying how he got this authority. His ultimate answer is passion, death, and resurrection. His life, birth, passion, death, and resurrection is the authority that he has to do these things. But he silenced the Sadducees. The Sadducees was that group of Jewish leaders who did not believe in the resurrection. And just before this, in Matthew's gospel, they came up to Jesus and said, there is no resurrection. There is no resurrection. And Jesus went on to dialogue with them, and he said, look, it's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. That living God is alive. And so he had silenced the Sadducees. Even today, Orthodox Jews have a problem with resurrection. Other Jews, no, the resurrection is there. I remember the last time I was here and was part of a Jewish funeral. The rabbi was very clear about resurrection. He believed wholeheartedly in resurrection. So I think most Jews indeed do believe in resurrection, but I think there's still a pocket of Jews who say, no, we don't believe in resurrection. So Jesus was getting to that point. They heard the resurrection, and then they tested him on what's the greatest of the commandments. And you might say, well, that's a stupid question. We don't know the answer to that. But there were 613 laws in the Torah, from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The 5 books of the law had a wealth of laws that you had to pay attention to, 613. And you can see why Paul got frustrated with the law. And he says, basically, Paul says the law is to point out sin. It's to point out sin. And we're not after sin, we're after grace. We want to live in the grace of God. And Paul's letter to the Thessalonians has been used these past few Sundays, and for the Sundays hereafter, for 2 or 3 more Sundays from Thessalonians. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. It's a short letter, only 4 paragraphs, and he pours out his heart to these folks because they're new to the faith, and they've given up their old faith, and they've stood for the new faith very vibrantly. Many of them gave their lives up, have suffered martyrdom already for believing in Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection as the way to salvation. The cross is the way to salvation. And so Paul's words are very poignant. This was last Sunday's first reading. I want to point something out. He says, unceasingly, and he's talking again to the Thessalonians, unceasingly calling to mind your work of faith, your labor of love, and your endurance in hope. He's saying it's not faith, hope, and charity. It's faith, charity, and hope. He's putting hope at the end of those three theological virtues, hope. I say that because there's a little poem I want to read. It's from a French poet and essayist who was killed in the Battle of Marmary in World War I. His name is Charles Péguy. This is just a little poem. It's entitled, Hope Pushes On. Faith sees what is in time and in eternity. Hope sees what will be in time and for eternity. In the future, so to speak, of eternity itself. Charity loves what is in time and in eternity. God and neighbor, as faith sees, God and creation, but hope loves what will be in time for eternity. In the future, so to speak, of eternity. Hope sees what has not yet been and what will be. She loves what has not yet been and what will be in the future of time and of eternity. On the uphill path, sandy and troublesome, on the uphill road, dragging along, hanging from the arms of her two older sisters, who hold her by the hand, the little hope pushes on. And in between her two older sisters, she seems to let herself be carried like a child who lacks the energy to walk and is dragged along the road in spite of herself. But in reality, it is she who moves the other two and who carries them, and who moves the whole world and who carries it. Lewiston, Maine. It's over. But the only way those people got through was hope. Israel and Gaza. The only way we're going to get through it is hope. Hope. And hope is strong. It might appear weak. It might appear just ephemeral or superficial. But it's what guides the other two. Faith and love and hope. Back to the gospel reading. The Dominican, Timothy Radcliffe, has this way of explaining the two commandments that are really one, to love God and love your neighbor. As a matter of fact, going back to that letter to the Thessalonians, this is Paul again in that reading from last week to the Thessalonians. I'll read it again. Calling to mind your work of faith and labor of love and endurance in hope of our Lord Jesus Christ before our God and Father, knowing, brothers and sisters, loved by God, how you were chosen. He's commending the Thessalonians for knowing their chosenness in God, loved by God. Before these two commandments is understood, we are first of all loved by God. We are loved by God. Creation, the fullness of creation, made in the image and likeness of God. That was last week's, the image of Caesar. No, it's not the image of Caesar that's in us. It's the image of God in us that has made us godlike. The image of God is within us. We are icons for God. We are images of God. And the reading from the Dominican. If you want some help too during the weekday readings are from Romans, Monday and Tuesday, and they're a fantastic help in this midst of this uncertain time. He says, this is the Dominican Timothy Radcliffe. He's talking about the conjunction of the first of love of God and love of neighbor. He says, this conjunction is explosive, like harmless chemicals that go bang when mixed in an experiment. It is like the two spheres of the brain, fascinatingly analyzed by Ian McGilchrist in his book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of Western World. Human civilizations depends upon the harmonious interplay of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, joined by a tiny cord containing millions of nerve fibers. We must love God with all our facilities of mind and heart, for they are created by the love that is transcendent and eternal. Infinite love made every aspect of our being, and only in seeking that mystery of unimaginable love do we flourish and find our goal. Otherwise, our love would be mere transient emotion. Without love's transcendence, love is reduced to passing feelings and of no ultimate significance. But the infinity of our love would lead to religious fanaticism and ideology if it did not come down to earth in our neighbor. The Pharisees in Matthew's gospel account gathered together against Jesus, using their intelligence to trap him rather than to love him. Their hearts were blunted and by hatred instead of openness to him. His body becomes an object to be destroyed. Without being turned to our neighbors, religious love can burn up the world. And the tiny thread joining the two hemispheres is the incarnation of the one who is human and divine. John Duns Scotus. Our predestination to glory is prior to any notion of sin. The Immaculate Conception, younger than sin. Incarnation is prior to creation. The love of God for us seeks to be imitated. Paul uses that word imitation again and again, talking about the theologians, the Thessalonians, who were imitating this for their neighbors in that part of Greece and being imitators of Paul and his preaching. If we can only imitate the God who created us and the Son of God who died for us, we and our world will be totally different.